Welcome to your 7-week journey on intermediate astrology for integrated healing work. And this is your class number 1 on astrology of wholeness. So let's get started. Okay, so here we go. So we are now starting to dive into the concepts of really the deepening of some of what we've talked about before in other classes and other courses, and we're going to be spending more time on integrating some of the energetics that we've been talking about before and now ever more in terms of the essential integration energies and polarities, if you'd like, primarily, and then also integrating astrology with some of the fundamental and essential tools, such as journaling, starting today, and then from next time, also with your favorite healing modality. Okay, so we're right here, the core energetic integrity keys for increasing vitality and overall integrity of your energetic container. Ready? Okay, so as always, just a little solar system reminder. We have a lineup here of our partners on the journey here that we like to project a lot of the stuff that we are learning about. Of course, these energies and dimensions of consciousness, they represent also dimensions of our psyche, right, in the bigger cosmos out there, and as we're learning, they represent equivalents also of our inner sky or the inner cosmos. Okay, so let's continue on here. So, and before we dive in, I just wanted to remind us of the meaning of wholeness, and then first how it is represented in the dictionary, and then also how I basically, from my perspective, how I see astrology of wholeness, and so that it can help you to position yourself in relationship to it. Of course, what I share is not some sort of overall, really a given interpretation, right, it's going to be an invitation to see where and how that will align with your own beliefs, if you'd like, and preferences in terms of not just how you work with astrology, but also any sister practices and modalities, if you like, right? So your perspective on the universe and overall healing and wholeness. Okay, so. Okay, so from the dictionary here that I Googled, wholeness is seen as the state, or defined as the state of forming a complete and harmonious whole, a unity, of course. Okay, and as number 1, and under number 2 here, the state of being unbroken or undamaged. So just a little official reminder that you are whole. And then from astrology of wholeness perspective, and so these are some of the principles that I consider, and they will remind you of also not just the meaning of astrology from this more healing-oriented and wholeness perspective, but it will also be about how we as astrologers and practitioners, right, as spiritual guides as well, are approaching this, or how I approach it, and then also how I teach and guide those that I am blessed to work with as well. So the number 1 thing that to me is fundamental in how I see astrology and astrology of wholeness, in particular when it's integrated, right, with our healing work, because there are other forms of astrology, including the ones that I also practice, that are a little bit more left brain oriented. And I'm not even talking about astrology for business. I'm talking about even a little bit more left brain that's more connected to timing and answering questions, where we're really answering questions not based on the natal chart, but based on the actual time of when the question is asked. We call that horary astrology. It's actually one of the, if not the most ancient of astrological techniques from the times when astrologers and priests and so on, when the time of birth was not available, when natal astrology as such did not really exist just yet. But basically, the moment when you would walk in, right, into the temple, or see an oracle or see an astrologer or the wise one, that would be the moment, and those few steps that you would walk to, okay, ask the question. There would be a divine alignment and really what we call a divine moment for not just asking the question, but really the seed for receiving an aligned answer would be present in that moment. Okay, so there are other obviously more cerebral ways of that require a little bit more a focused and precise interpretation. But as you hear me oftentimes reminding you and us that the importance of really balancing even that out, right, with considering the overall well-being. And so to me, astrology of wholeness, and really all astrology would be ideal, considers the totality of human beings. So the emotional, physical, spiritual, and mental body, right? The awareness that we have at least these four fundamental bodies, and then obviously well-being on that level as well. Also, astrology of wholeness sees the polarities, and this is obviously, so I'm speaking on my behalf here and how I teach it, that we see polarities as the unifying, interconnected forces in the universe. So what you have been hearing me talk more about is about the polarities and the integration of these energies from basically both of the more extremes of expression, or really from these unique 12, at least, right, those 12 unique points of view. So rather than just talking about, say, let's say when Uranus entered Taurus, where we're all hearing Uranus and Taurus, Uranus and Taurus, Uranus and Taurus, we have to at some point also consider that when that Uranus entered Taurus, by polarity, it's actually activating Taurus, Scorpio continuum. Okay, so and then obviously before we consider that from the cosmic cycles perspective, which is more advanced, we have to learn that at the fundamental level. So that's why we are here. So these 6 polarities, but there are many polarities. So we're going to start from the fundamental ones, right, which is basically the 12 signs, 6 polarities, and then we're going to also learn about other ones such as the sun, moon, and so on and so forth. So astrology of wholeness also considers different dimensions of the psyche represented by we already know are represented by those 10 planets, right, that we love to talk about. Of course, there are asteroids that are other planetary bodies, and of course many more that are going to be discovered, but those 10 core ones as representation of where more conscious awareness is needed, right? So I always emphasize that. Read, see the design, trust the design. If you see that Venus in the 7th house, that's where we got to, right, relax more, be more receptive, make peace. If you see that Mars in the 10th house, that's where we have to put in more energy. If you see that Saturn in the 10th house or the 3rd house or wherever it is, that's where we have to get more organized. And release, what I'm saying is trust the design as it is presented to you. Of course, we want to use our own judgment and intuition, intuitive awareness as it becomes available, and obviously the intent of the person that we're reading for, because that opens up the access as well. But releasing the judgment that we may be putting on, and this is what we see in a lot of astrology, unfortunately, and then in a lot of ways that maybe we have just inherited from the ways of how we approach life, is rather than reading things and trusting that's where the consciousness needs to go in a particular way, right? Aligned with the type of consciousness that we are reading. If it's Mars is more energizing, right, and hot, Saturn is more organizing. So there are some fundamental ways that really the chart speaks to us. And then rather than, oh, well, Saturn is intense, so I read in such and such a book that, oh, that's got to be, something about the difficulty in that area, or again, passing on judgment from our unconscious biases. And if you do discover, right, if working with others or your own self-discovery process, if it brings up these unconscious biases, that you can recognize them and you can shift them, because people are not coming to us so that we can, push on our own beliefs. They do come so that we can share some of the really accelerated ways of learning what we may have spent, a long time learning and integrating. But at the same time, that we can really see that obviously the person that we're reading for as a whole being, okay, as a consciousness. And then also when we're reading that chart, that we can also really trust it in a way that it is presented to us. Okay, so I hope this is making sense. I know I get worked up sometimes when I'm talking about this, because now you will be hearing me more talk about this, just because I find it so very important as we shift from these old paradigms of teaching and learning, where, again, because oftentimes I'll hear people come to me and say, oh, I've heard Saturn in such and such house means this, so that means I am destined, to, that's a way that's, first of all, oftentimes not really accurate. It's a very limited way of looking at the chart, and oftentimes it's actually not accurate too, because it does not consider it's not always possible to consider the totality of the chart, but at least 2-3 elements that we are meant to integrate, right? We don't have to consider, it's not even possible to consider the whole chart, but we do need to combine it with 2-3 elements, okay? And this takes a little bit of a learning. So what I mean is, right, rather than just reading that sun sign, that you can fairly quickly start combining the sun and the moon, right? And then as we're learning now, for example, the ascendant and then its polarity, which is the descendant. That's what we're going to be focusing on today. Okay. Where Astrology of Wholeness considers astrology as a tool for one's integrated healing work, as well as a self-realization tool, and recognizes and helps to bridge the awareness and growth gaps. So we're going to talk about this a bit today. What I mean by the awareness gaps towards a fuller body, mind, spirit integration and achievement of your harmonized well-being. And doing that gradually, okay, and more consciously. Basically boils down to that. So how can we harmonize our different aspects of our design with where we are at right now? Because that's important, because we cannot be harmonizing that without our conscious bringing, some of our unconscious stuff into the present, and then also bringing our focusness, if you like, which is our ego mind, really into a more coherent state where we can feel that we can not necessarily control it, but we can, just like as the sun, right, gravitationally. Not that it's, imaginable how that happens, but we actually, at a micro level, we have that capacity within ourselves. That's what the inner sun gives us, right? Is that we can keep really that inner coherence in place and know what we need to focus in on, know what we want to create, and then also know basically what we need to harmonize with. So we're going to learn today how the chart, in particular the ascendant and the descendant, which is the first and the seventh house, help you to start identifying these awareness gaps. So it's no longer a concept or something that you pick up from other people, but it's based on your own design, okay? I already talked about the empowering language. So Astrology of Wholeness for me relies on empowering a language that is helpful to you and helpful for the client, and provides an active way to work with the information. Not like, oh, well, you have this in that house, and so that's what it means. We can use predictive techniques, we can use forecasting methods, but from an astrology of wholeness perspective, always and in all ways, it has to provide a way to the client to actually access that information as an active energy that they can work with. Meaning, like, what am I going to do with that info, right? Can I do something creative with it? Otherwise, why share it? Unless somebody had asked you very specifically, and again, in some of the more more predictive ways of reading a chart, there will be points when clients will ask you, is this an aligned time, right, to launch such a thing? Or in horary astrology also, where, people want actually a specific answer. But that's slightly different from approaching it from a healing-oriented perspective, okay? So Astrology of Wholeness considers both the left and the right brain capacity in the learning and sharing process, right? So you're going to hear me continually going from the left brain to the right brain as much as possible, engaging both logic and intuition so that we can get lost in the nirvana and the concepts, that we don't land in the body and into practicality. And then also that we don't get stuck in just the practicality and the logic, because it's just then doesn't give us what in a lot of ways we spend searching for, and that is the energetics that's actually behind the logic, because it's that energetic that actually fuels us to take action, right? To actually motivates us to allow that to create that fulfillment and basically work, balance our way of being, balancing the masculine, the feminine, which most often you're going to hear me talk about balancing the solar and the lunar, or Venus and Mars, So we're combining the soul and the mind as well as the experiential bodily sensations. So you're going to hear me talk about this more and guiding you through that starting from the next class. We already started a little bit in that introduction to intuitive astrology, and then more as in particular when I talk about the practical exercises towards the end of each of these class videos. Okay, why it will be important? Well, the chances are, if you're watching this, most of you are aware that really tuning into that inner sensation is going to help you to basically just really connect with your innate truth, and knowing whether something is meant for you and whether it is meant for you in the present moment, and or maybe a little later on. And then if something is really if it just doesn't feel like an aligned energy, that you can park that and then just skip it, including what you're listening in and taking in this class, right? So connecting with your knowingness and then knowing when for yourself when it is time to integrate the next level, right? Just as you would choose to listen to the next class and then the next class, or maybe allow an extra week between classes to take in more information. Importantly, also for me, Astrology of Wholeness is oriented towards more fuller expression, okay? Fuller expression of archetypes, fuller expression of energies, fuller expression of these polarities in a more harmonized and really, again, fuller expression is really the how I experience it. And because even a harmonized way, I think, can get us a little bit stuck in ways that's not always embodiable. But sometimes we'll use the term highest expression and the lower expression. You will hear me say more effective and the less effective. Okay, so these are similar ways. To me, fuller expression is also more creative. It's both effective. It's more creative, and it just really is. basically feels fuller. It feels fuller in our body, and it feels more optimal, if that makes sense. And it's in the interpretation of the signs, houses, right, and meanings, it's less descriptive, similar to what I talked about earlier about, oh, well, you're, sun in Taurus, therefore you are this and that. So it's less descriptive of and static and as destined. And once again, it gives you more of the information to work with, that you could then choose to say, okay, this is how I'm going to work with it. This is where I need to send more awareness. This is where I need to bridge that gap. This is what I need to become aware of. And today we're also going to start introducing the concept of where we need to start becoming aware of our shadow in our chart. And then also how is that reflected in simpler ways in our life, how we can become aware of that, and then also where we need to start withdrawing those projections. I was going to say potential projections, but most often they're operating. So, and then we'll deepen that a little bit later on in this course. And then lastly here, Astrology of Wholeness recognizes and honors inherent paradoxes in a natal chart. So what are the paradoxes? These would be some sort of, in the beginning, they can be a little tricky, contradicting, for example, elements where you may have sun in a, let's say, fire sign, and then you have a moon in a water sign, right? So these two fire and water elements are contradicting, and the chances are you would have already experienced this. But we're also going to see how this paradox translates. As you will hear me oftentimes say, when in doubt, start at the ascendant. So with the ascendant and its polar opposite sign is where this paradox at the most fundamental level actually is functioning well and alive throughout our life, from an early on and pretty much on a daily basis. And even just understanding and reconciling that as best as you can, and obviously the purpose of this class is going to be to help you do that, can just help save you so much energy and release the need to waste your time trying to reinvent the wheel, because the wheel and the resources are already available and charted for you, not in a destined way, but in a mapped out way, if that makes sense. Okay, so and so yes, there will be paradoxes, there will be contradictions. So obviously my role here will be to help you, and so you want to be, especially if you're taking the course during the time when I'm offering that weekly Q&A support, you want to be asking me those questions. So I'm encouraging you to say, oh, Milada, this is contradicting that. Those are some of my favorite questions. How do I reconcile these contradictions? This is a fantastic question to ask because the chances I already have an idea. We spend a lot of time as human beings fighting literally these inner battles between these contradicting ways of being, not realizing that there is a way to navigate that more effectively and either resolve it, basically. I was going to say transcend it, but it's going to depend on what that paradox, or even that, whether it's a polarity, whether it is something else is asking of you, even that is going to, that strategy is going to be mapped out for us for you in the chart. And then importantly, in that resolution, very importantly, that we as the guides, as the teachers, as the consultants, right, are asking the client, this is very, very important. You're going to oftentimes, if you're working with me one-on-one, or even when I am advising you in a group, right, how are you already reconciling that particular, because even if you're asking me for an advice or some sort of input, there already would have been a way that you would have been working on resolving this, and that nobody else has, figured out or experienced in a way that you have based on your own experience and so on and so forth. So, and then we offer solutions where support is asked. So especially when it comes to these contradictions, while we can offer, and you're going to oftentimes hear me, especially when I'm here looking at different charts, right? When I'm helping you to see how we can reconcile that. But once again, important, even when we see a potential solution and an entry point and a reconciliation point, that we still give an opportunity for the client, or you want to, for yourself, if it would be that you sit with it a little bit longer rather than trying to solve the puzzle right away. Because it's not, once again, it's not always a cerebral and intellectual process. A lot of these resolutions need to happen on an inner level that really is even beyond what we can see in the chart. Always, but it just works beautifully when, in my humble experience, when we choose to integrate some of these essential keys. Basically, there are some practical, specific things that we can focus in on, right? Such as sun and the moon, ascendant, descendant, which we're going to focus on today, sun and the moon the next time. And then there will be some sort of unseen magic that happens in the background that you are not even going to have to figure out, but you want to feel it in the body as it happens. This is how you will know that, even though it may be unfigureoutable, we don't need to figure everything out. There is the energetic, what I like to call the energetic vitamins, and the wisdomness that we receive, and the guidedness, in whatever way you want to call it, in your own way, that comes through. That is just even more richer in the context and information and energetic information than, writing, I don't know how many pages about that in a journal. Okay. So with that said, I just wanted to make sure that we've got some basics here mapped out and outlined. Of course, there are more, but these are the key ones. Just wanted to put that out there because I will oftentimes talk about it or put it out there. So any questions in regards to this, please ask. And so we're going to dive in here in terms of what this gap is that I'm talking about. So this is the way that I recommend. So from astrology of wholeness perspective, right? So what I mean here is when you're helping another brilliant human being, including yourself, including your family, right? And obviously your clients as well, to become more aware, to become more conscious, rather than trying again to solve the riddle of the chart, or try to, again, figure out everything at once, which is just not possible, even for me after almost 3 decades of studying astrology and many years of practicing it and teaching it. And I don't try to figure out everything at once. Now, having said that, the more you do it, the more of it is going to just be integrated in some seen and some unseen ways, meaning especially if you employ your intuition in the process, right? We touched on this in the intro class when I talked about seeing the design, trusting the design. So some of it was it's just gonna come through without you having to figure it out. Having said that, what I recommend is to really see a lot of the processes, and you're gonna hear me talk about it, is about the awareness, right? The awareness. And then what awareness? Well, where is that gap? So recognizing the gap so that you can get out of judgment. Why would we look at it that way? So you can get out of the judgment. You can get out of trying to resolve it in a left brainy way, because some of the solutions are going to be logical, but again, once again, some of the solutions are going to be more intuitive. Okay. In particular, when we talk about wholeness requires really integration of different levels of our being. They require considering the emotional and the mental and the physical beingness and impact, if you like. Okay. So, but now what's powerful is now today we're going to learn, and you're going to hear me here repeat this several times for a purpose, is that awareness gap, ta-da, is going to start in your first house. Okay, so what you're going to see today is that between the first house and the 7th house, we're continually, literally like dancing in this particular way and kind of walking here between that first, if you like, that ascendant, and then somewhere experiencing or learning things on that continuum between your rising sign and the 7th house awareness, or the ascendant and the descendant. So what that, where that becomes obvious, really becomes obvious is that obviously if you know if the time of birth is correct, which is usually what you want to be hoping for, is going to show you that the ascendant really is where it helps us to focus in first. The ascendant is based on the time of birth. So there is some significant energetic information there and strategy and the skill building environment that's built into that based on well, obviously the time of birth, but also based on our karma, based on what we're learning, literally like what classroom we're signing up for. And then really it is that integration level, because all the 12 signs are, there is no some sort of different levels between them. It always is about a fuller, again, from where I stand, it's about a fuller expression of that particular archetype this time around. So at the ascendant is where your primary awareness gap is, okay? So there is an essential energy of our soul expression that must be consciously expressed in that interconnectedness between your ascendant and then its ideal opposite, which is the descendant, okay? So we'll see this in several examples, and I've got actually a few slides here just to really hopefully bring this point home. Now, the seventh house is a secondary perception. I mean, there is a reason it's the seventh house compared to the first, okay? To the first house is always like you're exactly where you're standing right now. It's based on your choice, primary choice, and the learning perspective in this, and experiential perspective in this lifetime. So even when we're going to be talking a lot about this particular, how integrating this particular continuum and this polarity, your focusedness still needs to be from the first house. There is a reason that you chose to be born with that particular time and that particular rising sign rising on the eastern horizon at the time you took that first breath. Okay, so once we identify that primary awareness gap, which we're going to do today, and then you're going to do the exercises to do this, then we're going to be filling that gap energetically. Then there is some more energetic magic in terms of now really making that come more alive with the richer, really the consciousness that really fills in that framework, if you like, that houses represent, which will be the sun and moon. So it's a more dynamic consciousness, right? That and a way of being that's connected with the sun would be your sense of aliveness, right? And the sense of I am who I am, right? And also paired up with a sense of well-being and feeling safe to be who you truly are. This would be your moon. So we'll talk more about that in the next time. We're also going to be learning other ways that we can, once we've integrated the essentials, then we can also, through the north node and the south node, the interceptions and so on and so forth. There's more here on the slide that you can read about and basically analyze if you'd like, and just take in when it makes sense in terms of the next level of awareness, right? So, okay, so the ascendant descendant as the primary awareness gap or consciousness gap, if you like, that we need to be focusing in on in this lifetime. So I'm calling it the key relationship axis, and that relationship as a term serves multiple purposes here. Yes, this is also connected with your relationship area in your life, which is the seventh. And it's also, which meaning relationships with others, with most of the one-on-one relationships, but also one to a small group. So it's different than the 10th, which is more you and the larger audience. 7th would be your close team. Also one-on-one, so more intimate, but also relationships where there is some sort of contract, but also people that, you know, we tend to just somehow always run into in the terms of whether particular pattern or a particular complaint or particular shadow stuff that keeps cropping up. So we'll talk about that a bit today. So these are key, so this key relationship axis, and it also leads back to your relationship with yourself, which very much opens up into the relationship with the universe, meaning so much of your life experience is connected to how you relate and you dance with your ascendant and the descendant by polarity. So in a lot of astrology schools out there and books and so on and so forth, there is a lot of focus on the ascendant, the ascendant, the ascendant. That descendant is usually talked about when we have questions about relationships and so on and so forth. But once again, here what I'm to remind you in particular in this video and in this class is that this polarity is working together. And if you are not on a friendly terms, okay, on a friendly terms with your descendant energy as well, it is going to feel like a push and pull in your relationship with yourself. And as a result, bipolarity relationship with others, anywhere where the energy of commitment, and this is the key here, the key, the energy of commitment comes into play. Okay, the energy of commitment. So you are still here to lead with your ascendant expression. So for example, if you have Virgo rising, then Pisces on the descendant, then you need to have a conscious focus on the Virgo ascendant higher expression integration. So it's just like starting a grade school, like I've got here at a certain level, and then gradually progressing. So you're starting, you still need to be like primary, like when you wake up, oftentimes you'll hear me say, your ascendant, and I'm going to have that built into the templates as well. We've explored this at length in other astrology and healing-oriented courses. And this is how I had found it to be very helpful for students and many to build it into the habits. So it's not just blah, blah, blah conversation about it, but you got to translate it into a particular habit. So again, it's not like a destined characteristic that you're going to read in a lot of books and you know, discuss and gossip about, but how it's actually going to be more functional for you is, it goes back to those guidelines that I talked about, that you can actually do something about it, that it can be a creative process, and that is that you build it into a habit, and then obviously you upgrade the habit once you reach a certain level of integration, because you're going to start first, you're going to have an aha around your ascendant, if you haven't already. And then maybe you're going to be resisting looking at that descendant, right? Because we're going to learn today that that's where we start recognizing our shadowy self and the shadowy patterns that we are meant to recognize, okay? And then if we don't, then they got to be shown to us by other people that are brought into our awareness, one way or the other, or energies and so on and so forth, principles. And so, but once you have that original, that first aha, then you're gonna, it's like literally like walking, being on a journey. Now you're gonna say, oh, okay, let me get closer. It's like, let me take the first step, the second step. So you're basically walking on this. You can literally think of it as a journey, as a road from that ascendant to the descendant, and seeing where you wanna be. We're gonna learn also how there will be more information in your chart, depending on if you have planets in the first house compared to having planets in the seventh house. And then their interplay to know where you need to still spend more time. Because if you have more planets in the first, you actually need to spend a little bit more there. But if you have, you can have a mass of planets in the first, or even one or two. But if the ruler of the chart of your ascendant, for example, is in the seventh, you know, then we still got to balance it very much. So the whole spectrum of your life experience is, you're going to find, is going to flow back and forth between the first and the seventh house expression until you master it and more fully integrated. Of course, this is a process. This doesn't happen overnight, and thank God. What you want to be recognizing is over-attachment or over-identification with any one of these aspects of your being. When people are overly identified with their ascendant, right, this is, you know, what we refer to as the Instagram lifestyle, where it's like all about the image that we project out there. There's a lot of focus on the brand. There's a lot of focus on the packaging, and maybe not as much on the substance. Now, it's going to depend the element of the rising sign, because if people have Leo rising, if they have Libra rising, I will actually suggest to them that they do need to focus on their branding, because for them, that is where part of the resistance and the awareness, navigating the resistance and choosing that more consciously needs to be. But if you have an earth sign, for example, on the ascendant, then you got to lead more with practicality, meaning like your work speaks for you. So for example, I have Virgo rising, and thanks to knowing my chart and just really how it functions for me and with me and how I function with it, my work in most cases speaks for me. This doesn't mean that I don't need to spend energy on building a brand, but it's a different relationship here with myself, okay? When you have Virgo rising compared to when you have a Leo rising. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. Now we can be stuck in one side of the polarity experience. If you have South Node in a particular sign or house, if you have Moon, we're going to learn that this is some of the areas where we can get a little bit more like we are tapping into more unconscious stuff and unconscious patterns. And if you have an intercepted sign, right, that's also where we can, be a little, so that you're not like confused why, that Mars is not functioning. Well, maybe because it's in the 4th house, maybe because it's an intercepted and so on and so forth. And it actually, again, we're not going to pass on judgment that doesn't serve. There is a reason that Mars is intercepted, or that, that South Node is where it is. So we just got to work with that, okay? We can also be in resistance to expressing a particular side of that polarity. So for example, wherever we have Saturn in our chart is going to tell us what way of being we tend to be resisting. Now, it's not all about the resistance. It's actually telling us also what we have already worked on mastering in previous lifetimes, but also where we may have either become too shielded or potentially even too judgmental, or maybe even fearful of expanding. And again, but we're not meant to, it's not a Jupiter, right, where we're meant to expand. We are meant to be more in our integrity there and more organized and self-sufficient, okay? So this is very important. Again, we're not passing, it's not about trying to reinvent the meaning of it. You got to trust that design is there for a reason, or that Saturn is there for a particular reason. So, if there's an opposition aspect, anyway, we'll talk about that a little bit more. I can also give you more information, but we're going to be primarily focusing on the ascendant and the descendant and how their mutual dance is going to give you lots of relevant information as to where you need to start the integration process. So, and I already talked about that we started integration by, and this is what I'm going to help you in this particular way, doing your work, the exercise, and then also if you get to ask me questions, which I highly encourage you, is how to translate that into effective daily habits that then become your strengths, okay? So that it becomes a more deliberate and regular way of sending awareness, and it's built into your life. So you don't have to then be constantly trying to figure it out, okay? So, and yes, as I was sharing earlier, it starts by resolving this dilemma. First, realizing that there is some potential here, potential two aspects of our being that are working at odds with each other, just because we actually tend to identify more with our ascendant. But even there could be some resistance based on some of these other elements that I talk about. For example, if you have Saturn in the 1st, or even if you have Capricorn in the 1st, just because the energy of that just requires us to be more shaped and more, requires more from us. And so we just, as the beings that we are, right, the infinite beings of light, we tend to resist that. And so for one reason or the other. So we want to be aware that there is some sort of potential conflict that's actually mapped out there for you, if you so choose to see it. And then be in the question of how can you really reconcile that in a way that is still going to feel authentic to who you truly are, to your true self, to your higher self, to your soul, in whatever way you refer to that more the highest level of expression that you connect with. And so I refer to this level of this axis of the personal / social awareness as really offering these essential energetic vitamins that are perceived. You're going to find when you start exploring this, that you're going to feel like that it's like you have a perception that they're missing in your life. So you're going to know that this is important, in particular when it comes to the descendant. Now, not for everybody, but a lot of people are on many ways. We're still kind of working out to be friends with our that ideal divinely matched energy on the descendant, okay, in the 7th house. So, so when I say here that we perceive that to be a particular energetic vitamin that's missing, is in my experience, it's as if there is a particular element that we need to be focusing in on more, particular energy or way of being, right, represented by that particular archetype. Maybe because there's just maybe a lot of focus. Let's see if you remember Angelina Jolie's chart, we're going to be referring to her chart a bit throughout the course. There was a lot of fire, right? And there was a lot of Aries energy. And that even the moon that she has in Aries is it's in a masculine sign, right? A very self-oriented. And yet she has that North Node in the 5th. So, right, it is about mothering is important for her, obviously, having several children and, for her purpose. So we maybe not in so many ways are seeing this easier relationship with that nurturing energy because of the strong moon. And when I say strong here in that particular, I mean more activated moon, right? More active. And then moon, not only in Aries, but it's also close to Mars. So it just makes it more masculine. So it's as if the universe said, okay, with all of that, fire energy, let's help you here. Let's choose the time that you come through that with Cancer rising. You see, so it's going to help to balance out a lot of that fire. That's oftentimes what I'm finding. So again, in a lot of ways, people will try to define, say, oh, you have Cancer rising, therefore you're nurturing and therefore you're kind. And in some cases that is obvious, let's say with Dalai Lama and Angelina, but though it's because those people, for other reasons, they have chosen to challenge themselves, right? Through really putting themselves out there to make bigger impact. And this actually has accelerated their growth. But a lot of times you're going to find that the people with Libra rising, like I've got here, that have strong Mars in their chart, are still working on presenting themselves or choosing more diplomatic and more peaceful way of being. Okay, so there is some fundamental paradox there. Now, when you bring into that the descendant, then even more can bring some of those, the polarity into play. So that polarity axis that exists based on the law that we already know is operating, right? In astrology, we explore that a lot. So it's based on the divine law of polarity that also is referred to or known as the law of polar union and the law of magnetic impulse. And so that from where I stand, it helps us to, it enables that full expression that I talk about, and also interplates, basically like the yin and yang, right? So there is a reason that we have yin and yang. There is a reason we have the plus minus in a battery, right? Because what it does, it helps the energy to move. Without that, it's as if the energy would stagnate, right? If you had plus plus, right? If you had in a battery, both poles were plus plus, the energy wouldn't move, the electricity wouldn't move. So when you have plus minus, when you have yin and yang, it just literally allows for that, right? That infinity, like that infinity sign, or the energy to actually move to from a point A to point B, and for an evolution to occur, for a particular growth, for a particular, fuller expression, if you'd like. So it creates this healthy tension, okay, that is necessary to remind us where more awareness is needed, and then where more optimization of that particular polarity is needed, because that particular polarity is in some way guiding, if not governing, our embodied experience here. Because the ascendant is very much, right, connected with our relationship with our body, with that embodied incarnation point. Okay. Now, if there's a tension that manifests that we're not conscious of, and this is very human and normal, but if it's left unchecked, Meaning if for a very long time we don't realize that there is this conflict and there is this one aspect of me and this other aspect that are continuously, it's almost like in conflict or some sort of, two teams, as if they're on two separate teams, that can be problematic potentially, and in some cases can become dysfunctional and split off. It's like literally one part of the person operates, for example, at work, and then the other person is just reserved. The other aspect of you is then reserved for operating at home, or something like that. Or reserved for one relationship, for your private relationships, and then you have another person operating in a more, professional relationships. Now, the chart does offer us these different, what I like to call harmonics that we add, but it's more like we need to add that layer. Let's say in the intimate relationships, we add that awareness that's offered by the seventh house in more relationship with our wider audience, in more public format than the 10th house. But we're not denying our sun, moon, and the ascendant when we're showing up there at in a more public forum, for example. Okay, we'll talk about that later on. Just as when we're talking about the ascendant and the descendant, in order to, for example, create harmonious relationships, the descendant offers you the way of being that is going to unlock that more harmonized way of being. But that doesn't say that you need to deny then choosing your primary, right, awareness and the way of being at the ascendant or the rising sign first. So at the ascendant, the most effective and relatable soul expression is for a personalized accomplishment. What do I mean by personalized accomplishment? So anything that you want to create in this world and in this life that's going to have your stamp of signature, your brand on it, people who are meant to be founders, who are meant to be starters, even if you have like one planet in the first, but especially if you have two, or if you have, let's say, Aries, like we've seen in John Lennon's chart, which is very like that first key, right? Energy, very, even Mars, very, very important that you have a personal point of view, that you have a personal platform, and that you are aware and consciously creating that, what I like to call your signature style. Now, if you realize at some point, sooner or later, that you need a team, and I don't mean like a large team, I mean anybody who you're meant to be in the awareness of, that you're meant to be relating to, that you're meant to be partnering energetically with. This includes your clients. This includes your collaborators. This includes your more dedicated audience, I'm going to say. So your inner circle of clients. Then we need to be relying also on bringing in this more effective unifying. So the ascendant is more relatable. It helps you to be recognized. Oh, there, right, comes Angelina. Oh, there comes Dalai Lama, right? So it's the first thing that people see is that warm-heartedness based on that Cancer rising, right? With Angelina, with that Venus and Cancer, it's also, people see that very lunar, because Cancer is ruled by the moon, very lunar, and obviously with the Venus, also that very Aphrodite presence. So it's like her signature style. For Dalai Lama, it's that very warm-hearted. This is the sun in Cancer in the first as well, okay? But when Dalai Lama needs to connect in with other people, then he needs to lean into that Capricorn as well, just as Angelina does, meaning having strong boundaries, meaning being very much, having healthy consistency and so on and so forth. And then also choosing partners who are solid. Okay, so we'll talk about that. So this descendant helps us to harmonize. Okay. So, ta-da! Hope this is making sense. So you know how sometimes people will complain, or we may catch ourselves complaining that, oh, why did that happen? How did I get matched with that person? Or, whether it's again in relationships and or ex relationships and or clients and or opponents, if you like, right? So the seventh house perspective, which again by the polarity is just cannot exist without the first, which is our relationship with self, right? So we know that's where it all starts and comes back to. But that's where we extend to connect with others, is we're always divinely matched. So the seventh house, actually, as we're going to see here, we're encountering both our partners and, as the traditional astrologers will say, our potential opponents. Okay, it's more about where we are again in that commitment energy. What keeps coming up in our awareness is something to look at, even if it's irritating, even when it's like annoying, even when it's triggering. If there has been a pattern, whether it's something that we really like looking at or something that we don't like to be looking at, but it's constantly, right? And you're going to see this repetition. There is something likely activated through that seventh house of yours, okay? So the seventh house is where we encounter ideal others that we are divinely matched to discover and relate to, but also the not so ideal others that are continually, there is a pattern of repetition, okay? Like including those that we complain about the most, right? If you're regularly complaining about certain people or certain traits, certain patterns in people, this likely is, and as we're going to learn today, something that is being triggered through your seventh house awareness gap, potentially. Okay, so the keys to healing our relationship with the energy of relating. So it's the energy of relating, okay, is in the seventh house. And once again, bipolarity, right? You got it, the first house as well. So we are operating and attracting experiences somewhere on the continuum, however, on the first and the seventh. So we're attracting at the primary, that if you like, attraction and creation level, we are attracting not just at the seventh house, by the way, we're at the first. We're always going to be somewhere on that continuum, depending on our life experience, depending on our age, depending on so many different things, including how our design is functioning in terms of, once again, if we have planets in the first, and people that have, let's say, a planet or even more than one planet in the seventh, we're gonna find them more often where, right, in the seventh, right? So they're going to be out there socializing, honoring relationships, maybe matchmaking other people. Oftentimes find people with a strong seventh house connecting everybody else, right? And or even competing. So that's also going to come into that play. What we're looking for here is that we catch ourselves and just gently refocus when we find ourselves too attached to any one of these extremes of expression that doesn't feel as natural or it doesn't serve us anymore, okay? And again, the more than just the ascendant and descendant help us to understand that, which we're starting here from those basics. So we already talked about the first house, right? It's body image, it represents our lifestyle choices, relationship with self. So it reflects our personal choice to incarnate at this time, to express free will, and then have autonomy over our choices. So once again, if you have a strong first house, this is really where that comes into play, right? So whether, again, it's Aries rising or Mars in the first, if it has that very Aries quality to it. It's also how we want to be seen. So how we typically choose somewhere, one way or the other. We have learned this, and actually we've learned this from an earlier, based on the early life experiences, that it's like we have to show up in this way. It's almost was like a survival mechanism or some sort of a coping mechanism. And so what we want to accomplish here, hopefully, is that we become conscious of this as a helpful persona, if you like, because it has a lot of interplay there with the concept of persona, so that we can develop here a more healthier relationship with that attitude, because we could have, because everything has a shadow, right? So even though we face, or we need to face it more at the descendant bipolarity, we could also be, if we have a lot of stuff going on in the first house, Or if we have some heavier stuff going on there, some of the outer planets like Pluto or even Saturn, we could be potentially getting stuck in some of the shadowy stuff even in the first. Okay, so this is the first thing that people see about us that we actually want people to see. And that is, we're going to learn that that is what we don't necessarily want people to see, and that we tend to sort of dissociate from or judge and or shun. And yet, one way or the other, we realize it is brought into the interplay just through the polarity, okay? So any planets in the first house also come here in that conversation as well, based on our appearance, based on our, in relation to our signature style. And then also if we have any planets in the 12th, but very close to that first house cusp. If you have an intercepted sign, meaning the sign that's completely included in the first, like Oprah, right? Then that will also modify your image and your personal brand that will be aligned. Okay, so I already talked about the 7th house encounters, committed relationships, significant other, your mirror, your projection, what you need others to play out for you and bring to your attention when not aware how, or when you believe that you're not aware how. Or if we're not willing to see that, or we're not willing to own this quality fully within ourselves, okay? So there are a few more here, people that we can encounter there. So I'm gonna let you read through that. And in a recap here, the 7th house awareness gap. So this axis requires more conscious shift from a personal me focus, right, in the first, to social focus. From me to we. From me as a leader and initiator to me as part of a group, right? From me as a single band leader like John Lennon with Aries rising, he obviously had to, at some point with that Aries rising, say, I'm gonna build a solo career. That's one way that he expressed that. But at the same time, if you recall, I'm gonna have his chart look at again, because with that strong Libra, you know, there is a paradox. For Aries rising, you gotta have something that is gonna have your name on it, okay, that you're going to have to say it's going to be built on my terms, and that's how he needs to show up as well, right, with a strong point of view. But with a strong Libra, he also had to experience and figure out how to work as a part of a team. So yes, meaning both need to be accommodated, and that's what he did. He had a solo career, and he also had to learn a lot through the band, and then the challenges with the band, right, and how to work through that stuff. So there is, we gotta illuminate our unconscious needs. The thing is that our conscious needs are more at the ascendant, but we also have unconscious needs that we don't always want to recognize at the descendant. And yet it is critical on so many levels that we do that. And also because again, for some of us more than others, where we will need to learn, not just that we need to be interdependent on some level, because most of us are here to co-create with others, to co-create with the universe at the least, and with other energies. And then also how we can do that more effectively. That key is going to suggest, how can we be a more ideal partner? Not just what would be and who would be an ideal partner to us. Because as you're going to hear me remind you a few times, while we will talk a lot about this being an energy or a person or even an ideal client and so on and so forth, and a collaborator in the 7th, it really is you in that particular context, your social self, your socially conscious, your social consciousness in a relationship to others. And this becomes, the 7th house also becomes a lab, an accelerated lab, where we need to be releasing judgments that are connected with specific energies, traits, and patterns. I mean, we can also not do that, but then it just becomes, as we learn, oftentimes it makes our relationship building a little bit more difficult, okay? So recognizing that there is this law of polarity that's at work will help you to bring more harmony and effectiveness, if you like, and wholeness in your personal and social expression. It will just feel like you're more integrated, where you will realize that that descendant energy is actually has been always there as part of you, and that these two, it's just like two energies can work as a part of a team. They already have been functioning as a team, but because of potential judgment, we have been passing on to it because of realizing that that aspect of us is not worthy of our full, because of the early stuff, right? And upbringing and so on and so forth. We've somehow learned to shun that and reject it. But it's just, we get to a point and realize it's no longer healthy to do that, because there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of creativity that's trapped in that awareness. So that there is a polarity dance is essential to master, so that you can feel more integrated and coherent within yourself, and really within yourself, rather than feeling like that something, like that missing energetic vitamin always has to come from another person. Because there is something, the paradox of the seventh house is that as much as we try to like, oh, that's not me, that's other people, that's my partner, no, I'm not, confused, right? Let's say with Virgo ascendant, Virgo rising, and Pisces on the descendant. Oh, it's other people are confused. It's other people that are that have poor boundaries and things like that. But it really is. We realize that once again, because of the way how the polarities function, it is just not possible, and it's actually not even realistic that we can be spending all our time at being our best Virgo self. You know, an example here. It's actually just not true. So we can, you know, try to put on some sort of, or even work as hard as we can, for example, to let our work speak for us. But at the end of the day, we also need to rest and recognize that we also have, we need to learn how to relax. And we, you know, speaking of myself here as an example, and then we also need, importantly, if there's a resistance with that, to basically agree with that being a necessary energetic way of being, that it is okay to relax, it is okay to sleep, and it is okay to take things a little bit easier. Not everything has to be perfect, okay? So that's basically how that works. So I already talked about what we need to transform in the seventh, right? We're shifting the I to we focus, learning how to share power, how to cooperate, how to work together. We're also learning how to shift codependency. Now, this is going to like overly symbiotic self, right? When we're too much depending on what the partner is going to say, on what the team is going to do, and what somebody else is going to do first before we take action. So we can be lost in there as much as we can be also lost in or overly attached to the first house awareness, okay? Because the people-pleasing self is well and alive in the seventh, and but can also become overly, we can get caught in the overly social, and just similar to a Libra, okay? So, but once again, the key is to really work step by step at raising this awareness for yourself, that we're releasing a judgment as to how this needs to be as much as possible by checking in with yourself. Like, is this making sense? For example, when you have an aha and you want to translate that into a habit or to some sort of tangible action, it's got to make sense. It's going to make sense to you in that moment. If the aha you had or the insight you had is meant for you, it is going to be likely easier to implement that in an accelerated way. If you think you had an aha, but you're still stuck in some sort of conceptual phase, and then that could mean that there is another awareness that you have to have before, another step. So, deep breath, as this could bring up more stuff here. And so we're starting to look at this in a little bit of a more gradual way. We'll talk more about shadowy projections and even ways and practices that we can integrate our shadow a little bit later in the course, but we are already introducing that here because it is such a fundamental and not that complicated way of integrating the first and the seventh awareness. Okay, so Why? We're looking at the ascendant again and the descendant because it's the most effective and dynamic place to start becoming aware of our shadow, right? So it's typically, again, it could be, we could be gaining that awareness in the first, especially where we're overdoing, when we're overly attached to that first house perspective. And you will know, because when you read, for example, or you will just know when you recognize that particular pattern. It's like, oh, I've been just overdoing. Like for me, let's say overdoing that Virgo. And right, with the analysis paralysis or overthinking and so on and so forth, rather than just continually. Now, of course, very, very different than how it would have been years ago or even months ago. But really learning how to dance with the Virgo Pisces. So for you, it may have been something that could have been Gemini, Sagittarius. They really are working. They already are working as partners, but it's important for you to recognize that. And then you choose that, and then you know how to really work with that. So it's a very, again, dynamic place. This is why relationships are such as an accelerated lab for upgrading our, journey here. And another thing here also, a reminder, as we're going to discover, that any planets in the seventh are typically projected on the other, just by the nature of how the chart is, right, with that ascendant. And then obviously on the opposite side of the chart is basically where the other, whatever other we tend to talk about keeps coming up, right? If you watch your language, if you are self-aware, you will know what the others are in your life. People, could be people, objects, things that, again, that trigger you, or again, things that you appreciate, that are continually present there. But it could be, again, there could also be a positive and or negative charge around it. So why are we talking, why recognizing our shadowy projections is important? Here, I've just got some quotes from Carl Jung, right? Which has been one of the people that has really helped us to understand this for really a whole generation. Obviously, there would have been others before him, or some before him, and then many after, to develop this and deepen this understanding. And maybe you have had your own, obviously, interpretation of that. In short, the advantage of projection, so there is an advantage to it, consists in the fact that one has apparently got rid of the painful conflict once and for all. Somebody else or external circumstances now have the responsibility. Sounds familiar? Another quote: not that these others are wholly without blame, for even the worst projection is at least hung on a hook. For even the worst projection is at least hung on a hook. Meaning worst projection, meaning when you're totally convinced that it's all about the other person, right? And it's all wholly the other person responsible. So even if the worst projection is at least hung on a hook. Hook meaning there is still, obviously there's the other person that's bringing something into that relationship as well. So because there wouldn't have been a relationship, there wouldn't have been any resonance if there was no presence of that pattern in the other person, okay? So perhaps a very small one, but still a hook offered by the other person. So meaning we're always together dancing in this. Even if some people are more responsible than the others, we just wouldn't have been divinely matched in that moment, right? Clients and consultants, right? Teachers, students. Partner one, partner two, parents, children, so on and so forth. The best political, social, and spiritual work we can do is to withdraw the projection of our shadow onto others. And here's Carl Jung's chart we already have seen. And so just as somebody who has really, really brought the understanding of that, what we call individuation process more into the analytical psychology field, but it really has infiltrated from their biology that he also, by the way, referred to, and then many other fields and so on and so forth, is interesting looking at his chart just to see where is this, because he talks a lot about the shadow, right, and illuminating the shadowy patterns. And now we're learning as of today that we start that discovery process in the polarity axis of the 1st and the 7th. So it would be fitting, I thought, to look at Carl Jung as, in his 1st and the 7th house. And look at that. With the Aquarius rising, the symbol, right, the archetype that represents individuality. And then ruled, traditional ruler, Saturn in the 1st. And look how large that 1st house. He doesn't have an interception, but it is an unusually large 1st house, which, by the way, it is not so uncommon for a lot of folks that were born in the northern hemisphere. And so, ruler of the 1st and the 1st. Even if we haven't covered this so far, how would you put that for yourself? Ruler of the 1st and the 1st. And not only that, but it's Saturn, which is about boundaries, and it is about and in Aquarius, that it is about individuality in its own sign. So it's a very, very strong. Saturn in Aquarius is pretty much amplifying the principle of individuation as well, even though they're not the same thing. But for all purposes intended, we're going to keep it simple. And then look at that. So when he talks about withdrawing, right, when he talks about illuminating this shadowy stuff, when he talks about, the obviously the concept of projection, and we learned how important is the sun in astrology, right? After the ascendant and the descendant, that's the next thing we're going to be looking at. Right on the descendant. So this is where a lot of his focus is, like illuminating the 7th house stuff. So you can bet your money that he spent a lot of times, which he obviously did, because the 7th is also about consulting work. He spent a lot of time, obviously, psychoanalyzing himself, but also psychoanalyzing not just his clients, by the way. From what I understand, he did a lot of the sessions with his colleagues as well in just refining his methodologies and so on and so forth. And plus Uranus is there. Plus the sun is in its own sign of Leo, which is about the fuller expression of self. Okay, so let's just leave that there for a moment. Hopefully this is making some sense there. And with that, here's our first template. And we're gonna, I know this is bringing up some stuff and there is a bit of information here, but I will here as best as I can always bring this hopefully to land this for you. So here is the first template that I'm going to suggest to use, and I'm going to have a couple of them, one more simple and one, this one, just to give us an understanding of what else we're going to be bringing here in terms of understanding and working with what I call the core energetic integrity keys. Okay, so we already talked about this in some other courses that are astrology and healing oriented. And then I am here now even simplifying it a little bit more, but also integrating it, encouraging you to integrate it earlier on rather than leaving this for some advanced courses, because a lot of this, my healing is really becoming ever more urgent and important to be talking about, so that we're not spending here just talking about Aries, but really understanding that Aries and Libra are forever working together. Okay, first house, and the ascendant, is the ascendant, descendant, right? It's that relationship axis. So, the 3 primary energetic integrity keys are the sun, moon, what I call the primary sacred partnership. Okay, and I've got it listed here because I still feel it as the primary one, but I find, and then the key relationship axis is technically the secondary, but really they really doesn't matter. They can really take each other's place here, because it just, I find it's easier for you to understand the ascendant first, which is why we're talking about it first. So with the big questions here to ponder, and we're going to go deeper into this through examples and then specific exercises. But the bigger question we're going to ponder here is why we're talking about this, is how do I reconcile my key relationship axis, which you can think of as a translating into that, what we call the yes and approach. right? A lot of the yes budding that we do in our life is, yes, I want to, be organized. Yes, I want to be productive. But, right, I also, whatever is that Pisces on the descendant, is there is a part of that we don't want to look at. But here we're going to learn that the yes and needs to be part of that conversation. Otherwise, it literally is like cutting off a part of our beingness that is very essential to our wholeness. How do I remain in energetic integrity with my social? And then you're going to add there a 7th house sign feature or characteristic. And then keeping in mind that it is still going to be from your unique 1st house perspective and lifestyle priority. Then the possible solutions, as I already shared, will be to build this awareness into daily habits, starting from the first thing in the morning. Now we're going to talk more about this in the later on in class videos, and we talk more even about that in some other classes, and we will continue to, because it's such a helpful way I found to again bring this to a practicality. Okay, and then the nodal axis as well. So these 3 are fundamental. So we're going to work with all 3 of these in this course, and we will work also with the Sun Mercury focus here, which is, so now the next slide, I've got here next level. So you don't have to get both of these, and we're going to go step by step, but we already actually talked about the sacred partnership of Venus and Mars in the introductory course. So for those of you that have taken the introduction, you already have an understanding of that. I will bring this in this course as well when we talk about the protocols for integrating your shadow a little bit later in this course. Sun and Mercury for sure as your higher coherence, leadership focus, and why in my experience it's so important to get an understanding of how we can choose more of that solar focus, and we don't get stuck in our busy mind represented by Mercury. I find a lot of people are a little confused, thinking that they are in their proper, more expansive energy, proper Virgo rising says, okay, where it can be a limited perspective for certain, let's say when you're trying to have a bigger vision for your life, getting stuck in your Mercury, as logical as it may seem, is not always effective. It's effective for the day-to-day stuff, but the Sun is the CEO. The Sun sees, just like your higher self, sees a bigger picture. Interceptions, which we're not going to talk about in a more specific way. We have explored that in other classes, and I will bring it in some of answering of your questions and so on and so forth, and then also planetary positions. So really, not so much the last 2 for this particular class, but we will talk about the Sun-Mercury integration, and then the Venus-Mars sacred partnership integration in, I believe it's the 2nd last class of the course, okay? Ta-da! So here is really distilled important prompts for you to keep in mind when working, and I'm going to simplify this in just removing, I know there's a lot of writing on this slide, but just so you have it in one slide, really is the distillation, as usual, of the important things to keep in mind, so you can stay focused hopefully and not get distracted by other elements in your chart when we're talking about this very fundamental relationship axis. So we already talked about the rising sign and the importance of being aware of your core needs there, and then intending it in your day-to-day. I've got here translating this into a first thing in the morning action, ideally. And then why we need to decide to show up more consciously based on our ascendant. We'll see this in the examples. Okay, so for example, with the Virgo rising, I am choosing, right, to consciously to show up more neat, preppy, modest, clean. So it's a more clean, green conscious look, for example. Virgo is connected with that. It's also very mercurial. So it's more like a teacher, intellectual, but very substance driven. So meaning, again, work speaks for me. So it's not as styling oriented as, say, Leo or Libra would be, unless, for example, your chart or the person that you're reading for may have that Virgo rising, but they also may have a Libra intercepted or a planet in Libra in the first, which then brings both Libra into that conversation. But again, it really is the primary thing is that sign on the ascendant. Okay. And this is here the key. So a lot of the astrological alerting from what I've seen out there is focused on the descendant being describing our ideal partners and so on and so forth. And in my experience, there is an evolutionary urgency, just as there is an evolutionary urgency at the ascendant, as because of the polarity, there is, and even more so at the descendant in a certain sense, when it comes to our relationship with others, because I feel like it's been so neglected in many ways. And there's so much stuff projected there. It's almost like there's like layers and layers and layers of stuff that we've been projecting. So because of that, it's just like buried, like we got, and now there's a little bit more urgency. But again, we don't want to be like rushing yourself. This needs to be a gradual process. But this is an aspect of that we need to connect in with this particular energy that can help us. You can think of it as your partner, energetic partner. This energy can be your teacher to help you to harmonize with yourself and with the world, okay, to be more effective in your in fulfilling a purpose. So I'm invited to more rapidly evolve the aspect of my social consciousness related to my seventh house. And important to recognize that I tend to project this aspect of myself and that I need to start withdrawing the projection step by step, okay? And then when we're looking at the integration, these are some prompts here that I suggest to work with. And that is that in order to be, why would we want to do this? Okay, why, right? Well, if you would like to be more magnetic to your ideal opportunities, and this is about opportunities and partnering and having just a more harmonious relationship with yourself and anybody else who you would consider others, this is why that would be important to do that integration and to be relatable to my ideal others. I need to accept my need for, remember, those are unconscious needs. So they're going to take a little bit of digging. They're going to take a little bit of healing and loving and accepting, if you like, and harmonizing based on the seventh house. So one of the way to kind of start bringing this into the awareness is to translate the ascendant into some sort of two of the keywords from those archetype slides, the basic ones, right? So for example, oftentimes I will relate Virgo to the healer teacher. It's the medicine man, woman as well. It could be the analyst as well. So the healer teacher, understanding that it's the healer teacher for Virgo Pisces that is relating forever, perpetually, by the law of polarity, relating. It's like being in that, like the yin and yang, relating to a spiritual creative at the Pisces end of things, okay? The perfectionist worker bee, if you like, is forever relating to the dreamer. So the dreamer needs the idealist and you know, the one that needs to be less self-conscious, for example, needs to be part of this conversation rather than saying, oh, I'm just going to sit on the Virgo side of things and everything is going to be perfect. And I'm just going to, you know, analyze everything and just work, meaning analyze everything until I'm blue in my face. And I'm just going to let other people do their dreamy Pisces. Okay, what you're going to find is that dreamy Pisces, I'm just saying, metaphoric, symbolically speaking, whatever your seventh house energy is going to be for very much present. What that tells me is that energy is actually present in significant way, meaning, let's say if this was Pisces, it would be Neptune. And also there could be planets in Pisces, but in some way there is some misapplied way of relating to that energy, meaning there will be a confirmation of this potential misapplied, misguided way of relating to that energy in some other way, significant way. So usually when I see that, I will say, oh, okay, let me see why this person was born with that Virgo rising, you know, what has it help them to, why that hypervigilance, how has it served them, and then how may no longer serve, because we need to really bring more easier way of being, relating to the ease and grace, which is Pisces. Okay. Pisces, which I sometimes, you will hear a slip of Pisces because I have Aries, and it's just completely, it's been an unconscious, semi-conscious thing. When I say Pisces, it will sound like Spices. I don't know why, but it's been cute. I think because of Pisces and Aries, I have it in the 7th. So the same thing here, just basically the same template, just removing here these notes in the last column, because sometimes there could be too many notes, right? But you can use them obviously as a reference, and then an even more cleaner, says Virgo rising, template for you that you can print out obviously and work with, which will be a recommended homework, and then obviously still have your reference sheets to know what are you working on there. Okay. Now, if working with that sheet, worksheet is maybe brought up more, maybe you're Virgo, you're still trying to make friends with, or Mercury, or whatever that is, and you prefer even a more simplified way of relating to your partnership keys, if you like, then you can work with this slide instead, or this prompt instead. Okay, so by journaling it, and I'll have a little bit more specific instructions at the very end of the video. So to create the most harmonious relationships and alliances, if you like, I need to rapidly evolve the aspect of my social consciousness expressed in one-on-one relationships as the, and you're going to insert 1 to 3 keywords describing your 7th house sign, right? And I'm going to have actually specific slides for you that you can pull from to complete this. In order to fulfill my purpose, I need to commit to co-creating together in the area of connected with the 7th house sign, ruler of the 7th house, or maybe in a planet in the 7th house most gracefully. I've got here most gracefully. Now I have Venus in the 7th, so there is my bias, okay, for the 7th. And even so, it is Venus in Aries. I'm just letting you know, a little bit of disclaimer here, that you want to be tuning here to the energy of whatever you have. If you've got Aries, only Aries in the 7th, for example, then for you, maybe it's going to be most passionately. Okay, so that descriptive, you want to, if possible, align with your ideal partnership key in your 7th house. Okay. We already have looked at these slides for the 1st house that I offered. So if you have done your homework and any work after the first introductory video, you have already seen these, right? So I chose to be born during the time that would allow me to be Virgo rising, healthy and approachable, and so on and so forth. Also your intentions and needs, right? I'm aware I need, therefore I intended no matter what. So it sounds a little strong, but it is meant to be as clear as possible. And I suggest non-negotiable, because your value system starts in the 1st house, not the 2nd, okay? So another slide there. And I've got the slides for the reference sheets for the 7th house. So now that brings out that ideal opposite, okay, or the ideal other energy. But remember, this is your social consciousness, okay? So it's your, it's the outward, but it's also very much your, when there is that some sort of relationship entanglement, or when there is some sort of energy commitment is brought into the conversation, that's where this part of you shows up. But it could once again show up in like, oh, it could be when it's projected, then if it is bringing up the whatever relationship, like if you can think of it as a some sort of reservoir of all of your past relationship stories, then a lot of this relationship story is going to be like stored in that sort of soul memory, if you like, of the 7th house relationship stories, okay? And so if you haven't done any work, either intuitively or astrologically or in any other way, or simply through learning through relationship magic, okay, and mastery, what patterns you needed to own there, then this, again, may have been projected onto the other. So you may have been recognizing this more through, oh, my partner, oh yeah, my husband, oh yeah, my wife, oh yeah, right, my whomever. So the prompt here for the 7th house exploration is, I choose to attract / collaborate / work / partner with ideal clients who are, again, you can obviously replace this, ideal collaborators, ideal partners, right? Who are, and then you're going to simply just choose some of the words here that are representative of that archetype on the 7th, okay? The ones that I highlighted are, just gives you a more distilled version. So for example, for Angelina Jolie, that has, and even Dalai Lama, right, that have Cancer rising, by polarity, it places Capricorn in the 7th. So their need is to attract a solid partner. And we'll look at Angelina's chart again so you can see how that actually functioned for her. We don't have so much information about Dalai Lama's relationships, but we can see how he brought this into his own functioning in the world by focusing on the self-discipline principle, as well as the long view, okay? Also, I attract ideal, so now also recognizing, because of the shadowy stuff that shows up here by polarity, I attract ideal clients or partners or others who struggle with. So we project it out there and say, oh yeah, they're struggling with that. But in reality, we have on some level, perhaps in the past, perhaps still some right now, on some level, struggling with accepting that part of us. Okay, so there is a learning gap. There's a learning gap for our clients that on a basic archetypal level, of course, our clients are going to be a whole lot more than connected with this particular archetype on the 7th, but you're also going to have a ruler of the 7th, so that's going to give you more of a sort of more general sense of who you tend to attract and who you're meant to work with. But again, at the fundamental level, it's so very important that you recognize here what are these gaps that you are meant to also contribute to illuminating, okay? Hope that makes sense. And if you have any planets in the 7th and or in the 1st, a reminder of what they mean and represent, right? So we're harmonizing with our Venus, and we need to invest more energy, be more assertive, take a stand wherever we have that Mars and Aries in our chart, and so on and so forth. So here's our Angelina once again, and we already have looked at that Venus, Mars, her rising sign in a bit. So for right now, I just wanted you to, we've talked a lot about the ascendant, even in the introductory class, and today, at this point, bipolarity, right? She has 28 degrees Capricorn, rather Cancer rising. By polarity, it's 28 and 53, 28 and 53 Capricorn on the descendant. So she attracts, from a relationship perspective, mature partners, right? She has a need to attract solid partners. But at even more fundamental level, this tells us, right, there could be some shadowy material here that needs to be processed so that her Cancer way of being, her nurturing, her self-acceptance of the body, her even way of being as a mother needs to integrate with this more disciplined and stoic and serious and sober way of being, so that it doesn't turn into some more extreme expression of that, okay? And it's okay if it does, because we all, again, are exploring here the stance in one way or the other, and then learning what works and what doesn't work, right? So remember, she's got here Capricorn, right, on the descendant. So again, from a relationship, from the physical relationship perspective, okay, obviously one of her last relationships has been Brad Pitt, which we know officially they have announced their divorce as of April 2019. So energetically speaking, we would expect to see some of that Capricorn in Brad Pitt's chart and or strong Saturn. Could be a Capricorn, it could be Saturn. And look at that. Not necessarily always, but it's just by, it is, obviously if they have, remember when I said, if they're matched together, divinely matched, universe is very strategic that way. So they're both working through that Capricornian, more solid, structured way of operating. So, and look at that. Brad Pitt, and I don't know whether you would have expected this, has 4 planets in Capricorn, 4 planets in, and all 4 of those are, the most personal: Moon, Mercury, Mars, and Venus. And now what is interesting, which you may or may have not have been aware of, because when you see this strong Capricorn, this is not necessarily a signature of an actor. Okay, this is more of somebody who is here to build something solid. Usually people that are in real estate, or people that are in either, obviously for him now, I'm going to share some tidbits here, either interested in architecture or construction or governance, and, very, very Capricornian stuff. Also administration, it can be executive roles. So interestingly enough, Pitt has a sustained interest in architecture, even taking time away from film to study design at the Los Angeles offices of apparently renowned architect Frank Gehry. And then in 2006, he founded the Make It Right Foundation, organizing housing professionals in New Orleans to finance and construct 150 sustainable, affordable, new house, of course, affordable. Look at that second house, right? Following the devastation caused by Hurricane Katrina. And then he also met with US President Barack Obama at a time and Nancy Pelosi in March 2009 to promote his concept of green housing. Look at that, Virgo, green conscious Virgo, right on his midheaven, as a national model, and to discuss federal funding possibilities. Now, apparently I've done a little bit of digging, which I wasn't even aware of until I was creating this presentation, that the houses that were built, even though they were apparently an amazing idea, and obviously hugely, huge kudos to Brad Pitt and obviously his team for making this possible for people that have experienced such a devastation. But apparently something happened there where some of these houses have started falling apart or experiencing some issues. So he's actually, this particular venture, he's in a little bit of a challenge. So now we know astrologically, because of Saturn has been moving through Capricorn, right, in particular this month with the station, both Saturn and Pluto. So anything that hasn't been constructed well, definitely we're going to have to, anywhere where we have Capricorn in our chart, we're going to have to look at and reorganize, restructure. And obviously it sounds like these issues have been going on for a while, but just wanted to kind of let you know. So interesting, actually makes me wonder, back to Angelina, right, with needing a more solid and Capricornian, like needing partner who is going to play this out for her. Because on some level of her being, she may have bought into the belief that she is not that Capricorn, that she doesn't know how to do that effectively, or maybe she, right? So like, let's say as a parent, she may believe that she needs to play the good cop, and then the partner needs to be the disciplinarian. Now, of course, ideally, she would want to balance this out, for example, but it makes me wonder if part of what's been happening for Brad with this Make It Right Foundation, where this whole structure around that business and the whole idea got shaken, whether that has also impacted how Angelina has experienced or have had this inner relationship with that, the unconscious needs, and who she felt she needed to attract in her life, say as a role figure, right, as a father role figure for her children, because of what's been happening with Brad professionally. Okay, just something that I wanted more energetically. We're gonna release any judgment here in terms of that. Really huge kudos, obviously, with his sun in Sagittarius and Sagittarius rising. So very important that he is making social impact, which he is doing. But, you know, I really feel for him here with that. I can't even imagine, you know, doing and investing so much. And then apparently there's a lawsuit now going on with the architect and particular material that was used, and so on and so forth. So back to Angelina, right? So with her Cancer rising, if we were to translate that into this particular template, very important for her that, you know, being aware that she needs and then intending to take care of, and intending no matter what, doesn't matter how busy I am, right, and what's going on in my life, I need to take care of my body on a daily basis. I need to heal, I need to forgive, and I need to accept my feminine. I need to self-nurture daily. This is Cancer rising, right? If you remember Dalai Lama, how he is continually doing forgiveness work and compassion and really embodying that. So at this, simultaneously, because it's not just about Cancer, we also want to evolve and really at least become aware potentially here of this aspect of our social consciousness that we tend to project, that's connected with a shadowy expression, potentially a shadow, very potentially, of Capricorn in her case, which is connected with cynicism and a controlling pattern and a workaholism, yeah, or workaholic projection. So where the partner is maybe too busy, oh, you're so busy, you're never home, kind of thing. In the meanwhile, right, she may not be seeing, and obviously she's seeing, obviously on some level she would be aware of that, but really making peace with that it's okay. She is a busy. Remember that Aries and the 9 and the 10? We know that 10th house or Saturn or that Capricorn is really functioning actively in another part of her chart, but there may be some judgment that she's been projecting towards that aspect of her being, and as a result may have affected her relationship with Capricornian partners, and yet she needs it in her life, right, in order to achieve wholeness. So right, so there could be so she needs to withdraw the projection of that coldness and resentment and bitterness, right? And at the same time accept her need for solitude, for achievement. Remember that the ruler of the 7th, Saturn is a ruler of Capricorn, is in the 12th. So that confirms solitude is connected with Capricorn, but it's also very connected with the 12th. So she has a need for solitude and achievement and strong boundaries and appearing tough apparently in public and relationships, but it may be at odds with her nurturing persona. So see what I'm talking about? And it's not about choosing one or the other, but just how we dance with that, and then also understanding that what we are projecting, what we're shaming, what we're blaming, and what do we need to own more of. When we look at Oprah's chart, with the Sagittarius-Gemini axis, how interesting that she says, and a quote, I realize that the only way to create a long-term improvement and empowerment and literally change the trajectory of somebody's life. She said the only way, so we're just going to see the key way, right, is through education. How is that for Sagittarius rising? Now, of course, she has moon in Sagittarius as well. So it's also essential. We're going to talk about that more next time, but absolutely this, what I like to call the education gap axis. When you have Gemini and Sag here operating together or needing to operate together, I find in gazillion ways, those amazing souls need to figure out those education gaps or communication gaps, depending on where their focus needs to be, depending on what they are looking to accomplish. So if we were to translate this into words in terms of who she needs to be and relate to here, then from a Sagittarius perspective, she would be the cosmopolitan educator, or that aspect of her being, relating to the Gemini, the literature lover, the writer, the teacher, and information junkie from the descendant perspective. And how beautiful that really worked well into everything, a lot of the publishing that she has done. She absolutely tuned into that, right? With her magazine, with her book club, and her one of her main slogans, which is to help get America reading again. And America, by the way, is Cancer Sun, so that when we see that Cancer in the 7th house, so she's very, very much representation of that. Oprah at home, as well as helping America read again with that Gemini on the descendant. So meaning her ideal people, which is really her ideal harmonious self, is the author, writer, reader, marketer. So she basically, in order for her to do her Sagittarius, she needs people who are reading. She also needs her social conscious self to be open, to basically to be perceptive, to be in a dialogue, to be a reader, avid reader, which apparently she has been. Okay, here she is on the joy of reading. That's just one of the great joys of reading: insight, escape, information, knowledge, inspiration, power. All that and more can come through a good book. I can't imagine where I'd be or who I'd be had reading not been such a fundamental tool in my life, and so on and so forth. Books for me have always been a way to escape. I now consider reading a good book a sacred indulgence. Time alone to be any place I choose. Can you hear both the Gemini and Sagittarius working through? What I know for sure is that reading opens you up. It exposes you and gives you access to anything your mind can hold. This is why Sagittarius and Gemini need to work together, because from a Gemini perspective, we can get stuck in a limited worldview. And then Gemini says, oh, hang on a second, we got to think bigger. It gives you the ability to reach higher ground. These are the exact words that I use to talk about Sagittarius and the 9th house that Sagittarius is connected with. A world of possibility awaits you. Keep turning the page. Can you feel and hear her integration of the ascendant and the descendant? Freedom is also connected with Sagittarius. Now, it is also connected with Aquarius, where she has her sun. But this to me is very much the integration. And that's usually what I look for, to see how people have integrated this in their language, obviously in their life experience. Books were my path to personal freedom. I learned to read at age 3 and soon discovered there was a whole world to conquer that went beyond our farm in Mississippi. And then she talks about a respect for education. And so again, Gemini, Sagittarius, very, very much being transported to a different land, a different realm through words and language. Okay. Couple more examples here. We talked about John Lennon. So with that Aries, a Libra relationship axis. Okay. How he expresses that dilemma. Trying to please everybody is impossible. So he's learned that. You know, maybe he's tried to spend a lot of time here in Libra, pleasing, people pleasing, which is connected with both the 7th and Libra. So apparently he tried that. He said, if you did that, you'd end up in the middle with nobody liking you. You've just got to make the decision about what you think is your best and do it. There is the person who's actually been dealing with reconciling this, giving us the exact way that they have achieved this. I don't know about you, I'm always so fascinated by asking, actually, how did you reconcile this? Even when I am in the seat to help people to bring more awareness to bringing that to the next level. Then he says, I'm a violent man who has learned not to be violent and regrets his violence. Aries, Libra, right? Expressing my anger, expressing my anti-establishment, feistiness, but also learning in order for me to be accepted socially, I gotta also, right, play the politics. That's what Yoko has taught me. I couldn't have done it alone. It had to be a female to teach me, apparently. That's what he believes. See, a lot of times I find in our society, people relate a Libra to a female energy. I guess we could say rightfully so. But it's not necessarily how it needs to be. Men, obviously, like John Lennon have very much been in touch with that. And then he says, I was always torn. Oh, it's all right. It's all right. I look at early pictures of me self. It's interesting. He says, not because I'm myself, he says me self. And I was torn between being Marlon Brando and being the sensitive poet, the Oscar Wilde part of me with a velvet feminine side. To me, this is that Aries, a Libra dance. I was always torn between the two, mainly opting for the macho side, because if you showed, so he realized, I got to do the dance, but I got to focus on the ascendant. That's actually going to help me to be more relatable, because an activist, he got a war protester, he basically that's what he, and then a solo career person, because if you showed the other side, he learned you were dead. He talks on and goes on and on about when he realized that if he showed too much of that feminine, that he would get beaten up in his neighborhood or things like that. Then he says, we all have Hitler in us, but we also have love and peace. So why not give peace a chance for once? That's his Libra. My role in society, or any artist's or poet's role, is to try and express what we all feel, not to tell people how to feel, and not as a preacher, not as a leader, but as a reflection of us all. Now, this is a very interesting, I'm going to say, projection, because he's actually here denying to me. He's saying, I don't want to be a leader. So there is a part of him that actually said, oh, right. Because he has a lot of Libra there. So he does need to spend, right, illuminating that solar consciousness in Libra as a reflection that's very Libra in the 7th house. So not as, so this, I would have a conversation around if I heard the client speak like that about their essential aspect of their self. Okay. Right now, the public is our only criterion. You can aim for a small public, a medium public, but for myself, I like a large public. And I made my decision in art school. If I'm going to be an artist, remember, artist is a Libra archetype, also Leo to a point, and creativity and spirituality, also Pisces, but very much Libra. I want the maximum exposure, not just paint your little pictures in the attic and don't show them to anybody. Libra says, people, here we go, right? And look at this now, I find, where you can really see how he projected stuff on his Libra. He says, when I arrived in art school, there were a lot of artsy-fartsy guys and girls. Artsy-fartsy, he calls the artsy people. Mainly guys going around with paint on their jeans and looking just like artists. And they all had lots to talk about and knew all about every damn paintbrush, and they talked about aesthetics. Libra. But they all ended up being art teachers or Sunday painters, which he did not want to do. He said, I did not want to be an art teacher or a Sunday painter. I got nothing from art school, apparently. That probably is not true, but there you can see the judgment, except for a lot of women, a lot of drink, and the freedom to be at college and have fun. I enjoyed it like hell, but for art, I never learned a damn thing. So there he goes saying, I'm going to be my Aries rising self. Okay. So I hope that makes sense to me. These quotes are so revealing, rather than intellectualizing this, to actually hear from real people how they have resolved these inner dilemmas. And then obviously one of his significant partners, Yoko Ono, with interesting love. Remember how for Angelina, she had Capricorn, and then Brad Pitt had a lot of Capricorn. Capricorn also would have been attracting mature partners, and she had Billy Bob Thornton as well, 20 years older, even Brad Pitt, a few years older, right? So that absolutely, we can see how that works. And for John Lennon, right, once again, Aries rising a Libra, so he needs this sort of, even though he can say artsy-fartsy, artistic people, right, poets, it's like making fun of your essential aspect of your essential self, that actually says you got to attract somebody that's artsy-fartsy, if that's what you were going to call it. And then he, he's got Yoko Ono with a Libra on the ascendant, just flipped. And then Aries. So now she is the one that's projecting the Aries likely here and having potentially challenges with integrating the leader self. Okay. So, of course, she says the dream you dream alone is only a dream. A dream you dream together is a reality. How very appropriate for a Libra rising. You can be very wild and still be very wise. So that's great for an Aries on the descendant. I like artists who have something to say. This to me is just beautiful and powerful. That is phenomenal way that expresses that integration of Aries. Be a leader, but also learn how to harmonize, or be an artist, but make sure that you have a personal point of view. Don't get lost in trying to be overly politically correct. Life with another person is always difficult. Now that's interesting. We live too long for one marriage. So I'll leave that up to you for interpretation, okay? And then, so remember that when you know, with that Aries here, and she's got Uranus here as well. So absolutely she needed to liberate this part of her, which is the wildish self. But also remember, she would attract this this energy from the outside world if she did not own that very, if you like, masculine, wildish self. So in one of the interviews, she was asked, what's your take on feminism and women's rights here and in the world right now? And she said, I think there is an incredible repercussion. We stood up for feminism. And by the way, in my experience, Libra and both Libra and Aquarius are oftentimes connected in what I see in people's charts with feminism, because it's connected with equality, okay? And so we stood up for feminism and all that. And it came to a point that we were attacked so much. So that's Aries, right? Not owning your Aries. We were attacked so much that women got very intimidated and said, no, I'm not a feminist. No, I think feminism is bad. There is nothing bad about feminism. We have to help each other because there's a lot of women in the world who are suffering because of the fact is we're not equal. It's as plain as that. It's still a man's world. There is your seventh house projection. It's out there. It's the man, potentially, right, that are to blame for the disharmony. I don't know. We'll go on with it. And then apparently, just recently, from what I understand, at 85 years old, Ono is a seasoned veteran at combining aggressive but nuanced. Aggressive is Aries, nuanced and styled, right, is very much a Libra. So see how that axis is just really brought through so much of what we do. We can talk about, and we're going to learn about many other dimensions of our chart. But this is really a fundamental here for your having a really energetic integrity of your container of understanding and of being and experiencing life, that an experience. If you miss that just because you know, we love getting carried away with so many other elements, you can feel like you're always missing something so very important. To work on this. And then she says, since emerging from the New York art scene, the Japanese immigrant has forged her work's trajectory at the, listen to this, at the intersection of peace and war through painting, performance, art, and music. How more accurate can that be of the Libra Aries intersection of peace and war? And then she said, we can either fight and kill or shake hands and make a beautiful world together. Which would you like? Among Ono's long list of convictions, self-love has always been at the forefront. This is Aries. This is her working on her self-love. This is designated in I Love All of Me, a lift from her 1985 record Star Piece. If you can't accept yourself, says a Libra rising Aries, projected Aries on the 7th, then how could you accept other people? If you can't accept yourself, then how could you accept other people? If you don't integrate your 7th house stuffs, how can you integrate, right, these two aspects of your being, this polarity? So really, one work with the other. She has figured that out, obviously, without astrology. So she asks, nodding to the idealized brotherhood of men she and her husband so embraced. Okay. And ta-da, here are the slides you've already seen, just so you have them here, the fundamental distilled keywords of all of the zodiac sign expressions and the archetypes and the questions for each of the 12 houses to explore, as well as the meaning of the houses, just so you can have it here as well when you're working and getting used to, right, the meaning of the houses and the key meanings of each sign. We have a couple more examples here just very quickly. Reminder right now that we've learned so much today, hopefully, about the importance of this awareness gap and how much of our life and our purpose and our relationship stuff is intertwined with how well we do this dance. Speaking truth, demanding justice, Gemini and Sagittarius, right? Which I like to call the education gap axis. Again, just if you pick one word, so I invite you to explore, depending on whatever you have on the ascendant, pick one word that resonates and then the other one for the descendant. And then it's simply, as I said, rather than projecting some sort of trying to figure it out, it's always a gap. There's always, otherwise it wouldn't be on the ascendant. That being on the ascendant and descendant tells that there is a significant awareness gap that needs to be bridged by you in collaboration with your colleagues, partners, right? Everybody else who comes into play in your life and awareness. So Dalai Lama with Cancer and Capricorn, which I like to call emotional maturity axis, right? Yes, we can talk about, and we already talked about that, Cancer rising, Sun in Cancer. But now we're learning, and especially you see how that's confirmed. He's got North Node in the 7th, and we're going to learn also about that. Sun is important, but the North Node is also strategically important for him to integrate that polarity. We're going to learn that in one of the next classes. So emotional for Cancer, maturity for Capricorn, or emotional resilience, if you like. And so I would call this empathy and compassion gap, meaning Dalai Lama is here to reconcile that, to resolve that. So basically, when we're experiencing this gap, it also, what that allows us, even though it's like we may never feel complete around it, but we will have, of course, experiences of harmonizing this. But what it does is, through this polarity, is actually allow, because we're never complete with it, it just prompts us, it encourages us, it fuels our desire to solve this by creating solutions to that. Okay? And so one of the recent solutions that Dalai Lama has apparently spearheaded or been a big part of is this learning online platform called C. So in his latest and most distinguished contribution to the world, His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, with the Center for Contemplative Science and Compassion-Based Ethics. Where is the ethics? It's the 9th house, right? Sagittarius and the 9th. He's got Saturn in the 9th. And if you're likely hearing me talk about Saturn, one of the core things is it's our most significant work. That's where we need to get organized. It's where we need to be willing to learn to lean into that resistance rather than, oh, it's going to be difficult. Oh, it's maybe people said that if I have Saturn there, I shouldn't travel, or I should, hello, how is that helpful to anybody, says cheeky me. I mean, imagine if Dalai Lama heard, oh, you shouldn't travel because, maybe that you got to be, I mean, of course, by traveling so much, he may have had some, of course, by striving to figure out how he can be in integrity with this most substantial work, which is the schools, which is the education models of the 9th, he would have experienced, maybe not always, the perfection. It's just the nature of spending a lot of time in that area. Can you see how that would have been such a limiting perspective? So that's where the astrology of wholeness comes in for me. So compassion-based ethics and at Emory University developed a comprehensive framework for the cultivation of social, emotional, and ethical competencies for children in kindergarten to students in secondary education, as well as higher education, 9th house, higher education, and professional education. A long-cherished dream of His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, the innovative program is based on the universal secular ethics. Saturn is secular and is driven by his vision for a compassionate, right? So you see, his vision is a compassionate and ethical world for all. It's a primary platform, you could say, of his belief system is compassion. Compassion, that is Cancer for you. And this is also what drives Angelina Jolie, right? So, and then also here I've got a slide on his principal commitment. So there are several of them, but just so you can see how this key relationship axis, the ascendant-descendant dance and application and integration, plays into the fundamental principles that we base our life on. Yet it's so more important that we do that consciously. So you want to do that consciously so you can stop wasting your time on trying to do this dance unconsciously and then wasting your energy having these inner battles with yourself, right? Hopefully this helps you on that journey ever more step by step. So where he says, or it is said on his website, firstly, as a human being, His Holiness is concerned with encouraging people to be happy. Now that's a Leo, and it's the intersection of Leo and Cancer. Cancer is more that sort of emotional fulfillment, and Leo is more with that happiness. But remember, he's got Sun, which is a natural ruler of Leo in the first house. So it plays into that. So it's not just Cancer rising, it's Cancer rising with Sun in the first house that brings that element of happiness and leadership and the importance of radiating what we are teaching, role modeling. Helping them understand that if their minds are upset, more physical comfort will not bring them peace. But if their minds are at peace, even physical pain will not disturb their calm. He advocates the cultivation of warm-heartedness and human values such as compassion, forgiveness, tolerance, and contentment. All of the Cancer, all of the ascendant, and then I cheer self-discipline, right? Which is the integrated Cancer and Capricorn axis. Okay, and then you can read the rest of it. Really, it's the principal commitment here that is important. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense and serves. Your quiz questions for today are: who do we encounter in the 7th house of relationships? So I've had that in some of the slides today. Who do we encounter in the 1st house of personal image and style? Maybe tricky, maybe not so tricky question. And then how does projection serve us? How does projection actually serve you? So it does serve us until it no longer does. And you will know when it no longer serves you because it will start feeling like you're spending a lot of energy on trying to reconcile yourself rather than harmonize yourself and actually focus on what you want to create, okay, rather than reconciling the inner stuff. So hope that makes sense. There's nothing wrong, obviously, with working on our healing and work in, depending on where we are on that journey. It's just that there are ways that we can make that easier, more graceful, and if you so choose, in it more accelerated, okay? And ta-da, your next step, as I mentioned earlier in the class, so we're going to start with journaling as your suggested self-discovery tool and self-reflection tool. So in the class number 2, which is going to be the next one, we're going to begin integrating astrology of wholeness with intuitive awareness. Now, we already started doing this in the introduction to intuitive astrology. So we're going to deepen that here, and then your favorite healing modalities, which you choose. I will refer to some of them that have worked really well for me, and then some that I am aware of, some that I'm going to actually help you to see in how you can actually see what would be aligned for you based on your chart. And you're encouraged to integrate astrology, as I said, in your own healing process, a wellness protocol, and with your favorite functional modalities that have worked well for you in the past. So I'm not going to sit here and say, this is how you're going to have to do this. I'm going to share with you what has worked for me. Maybe I'm going to be a little bit convincing in, obviously, in certain ways, in in terms of things that have worked well for me. And then if I feel that something is going to be a helpful shortcut, so you don't have to waste time, this is one of the core reasons why I like to integrate information and digest it before I present it here for you. That's my Virgo rising speaking. But also as I'm integrating that Pisces, realizing that I gotta leave some space for grace, right? I can't chew and digest everything for you. You gotta also do that work for yourself in a way that makes sense. So we're going to discuss that in the next class. And then for today, okay, so your next step suggested here is a journal exercise number 1. I'm now becoming aware of my tendency to shun those who appear even slightly, fill in the blanks, and then insert a 7th house shadowy trait that feels familiar. So still you're going to choose one of those shadowy traits from those 7 house slides, something that feels still familiar. Even if like, oh, no, that's not me, but it's like, oh, yeah, it's been coming up. It's been coming up through other people. Use that and just explore that and see what that does for you. I'm gradually becoming aware of my tendency to shun, judge, reject, avoid my own behaviors and aspects of self that may appear to others to be in any way connected with a 7th house shadowy trait that you avoid. You want to insert there. So those 2, I want you to, or I suggest to particularly connect with the slides, right? Particular 7th house shadowy traits that you can pull from the slides for interpretation. Now, the last 2, I'm going to suggest to just put in to fill in the blanks based on what comes through, based on your own experience, and then work in reverse and then say, oh, okay, let me match this with a particular zodiac sign. If you know. If you haven't been able to match that, then, when you have the opportunity, you want to ask me if that is offered as part of the course model. And when you're taking this particular course, so ask for my assistance with that. So I'm often triggered when others, e.g. my partner, don't own their tendency to fill in the blanks. So then what zodiac sign would you, so you want to fill in the blanks based on your own experience. And then next step, what zodiac sign would you associate this action with? But I wanted just to park astrology for a moment, use your intuition, use your logic, use your past experience to fill that in. And then the last here prompt is, I typically wait for others to offer what? What is it that you would like other people to do in the world or in your relationship or initiate or could be in friendships, but this would typically be in these significant other relationships, initiate or create and offer to you. And then I want you to assess that, what sign is that would be associated with. And then only if you have planets in the 7th house, you can also consider that using those slides as well. So the sign on the 7th, and also if you have a planet in the 7th. If you don't have a planet in the 7th, then just refer to the sign on the cusp, or if there is an intercepted sign in the 7th, meaning completely enclosed in the 7th house. So your next step after doing that journaling, or you can do, if you like, you can do this homework first and then do the journaling. Okay, so it absolutely is up to you, is to identify your key relationship axis keys and work through the provided worksheet on slide 21 or 22. And then that 20 to 30 is section of the slides is going to give you those interpretation tools as well. Or alternatively, fill in the blanks of the ideal partnership keys. So that was this particular slide. I'm including it here at the end, so you know what I'm talking about. Okay. Ta-da! I know this was the bit. Hope it served. Hope it illuminated some important stuff to work with. It is important and essential, as we're going to learn. If you do spend a little bit more time on this, you will thank yourself later, because you will start building a very strong fundamental understanding of how and what your whole cosmic design is based on. In particular, obviously, if you know your as accurate as possible time of birth. And looking forward to seeing you next time for your video class number 2 on, ta-da, the essential sun-moon energetic partnership on your path of individuation to emerge. So why would that be important? In addition to amplifying your vitality and just a general sense of well-being, to emerge as a transformational leader in your niche. One of my core intentions and passions in working with amazing souls like you is to help you to emerge as a transformational leader in your industry, in your niche, okay? So that's for me, astrology for a business perspective. And then once again, these are the 2 worksheets to work with at the end of watching this video. Okay, so and then once again, you want to explore here if the journaling exercise, so you want to choose this for yourself. This may make it faster and easier to tackle first if you like. Give yourself some time. I know this is going to bring up stuff, so we're going to start this slowly and gradually. If you only want to, even if you do 1 or 2 of these and it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to, feel free to skip and then go on to another part of this exercise here that is calling you at this time. Okay, so big hugs. Thank you for listening and participating. I am looking forward to connecting in again very soon. Bye for now.